Just yesterday, I was driving on I-10, and I was talking to a buddy of mine who's from Colorado. I said, hey, listen, I go, I am on I-10 right now, and to my right, there are 24 horses and 2 wagons. It's a trail ride. Of course, we all understand that, but it was just kind of surreal. Here I am cruising in my car, and I look to my right, and there's these just fleet of horses and wagons. How about that? So happy rodeo beginning, y'all. It's here. Let's hear a yeehaw. That's not bad. That is not bad. So many years ago, back in the day, all throughout the country, when I was a kid growing up, everything was about space. Everything was about astronauts. Everything was about going to the moon. Not just here in Houston, but all over the country. That's what it was about. So that kind of spawned a lot of shows about science fiction and about space. Of course, you had, back in the 50s, you had the Twilight Zone, and you had, eventually you had, even before Star Trek, you had Lost in Space, right? And then there was a show on Saturday mornings. Why it was on Saturday mornings when little kids were watching TV, I do not know, folks, but it was a scary story, a scary show to me. It was called The Land of the Lost. And The Land of the Lost is about this very innocent family, a single-parent family, the Marshall family, their dad, Rick, and their 2 kids, Will and Holly. And somehow they got caught in an alternate universe, and they were trying to find their way back home. They were trying every episode about trying to find their way back into the world, back on planet Earth. And the whole time when they were gone, they were always confronting these weird humanoid characters called Sleestaks. Yes, we have some scholars in the house today. Sleestaks. And they were just, it was kind of I would kind of watch it, but not kind of watch it. But I thought about that show recently for some reason, and as I was getting ready for today's message, and I thought about just that title, The Land of the Lost. And I thought about our country the last 5 years. And I feel like our country and our culture, we're lost. And I feel like we're living in the land of the lost. In other words, as a people, as Americans, we've kind of forgotten who we are. We've forgotten, where we are, and we don't know where we're going. It's very difficult to find some things that we can unify over in the culture in which we live. So it's kind of like we're like that family, the Marshall family, and we're living in the land of the lost. Now, not only are we lost as a culture, I feel, we're adrift as a culture. We don't know where we are. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we're going. We don't know how to find our way back home. We don't even know what home is. We're also lost individually, existentially. When you're lost, you don't know where you are, right? We've all been lost physically, right? We've been lost maybe in the woods or the forest, or lost as we're on a hike somewhere and we don't know where we are. Or before we had these marvelous inventions, GPS on our phones, we could get lost on a trip. We've all been lost, but we've all been lost probably existentially, if you would, or metaphorically lost. Like, man, where am I going in my life? How did I wind up here? How do I get back there? And we feel lost. So lostness kind of stirs up a lot of emotions in us. I don't know about you, but I can't keep up with all the initial phrases and letters. Like when I'm communicating with my kids and they're sending back all these letters, these abbreviations, I don't even know what they mean. I have to look them up. But I learned one this week, and I like it a lot because I think it describes what it's like to be lost. And that's the initials FUD. Have you ever heard of FUD? Do you know what FUD is? F-U-D, FUD. FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And I thought about that in the context of being lost. When you're lost on an individual level and you don't know where you are, you're trying to find your way back home, you're living in the land of the lost, you have a sense of FUD, don't you? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Someone found this scribbled on a painting in a Southern California cafe many years ago. Someone wrote, "I have taken the pill. I have hoisted my skirts to my thighs. I've dropped them to my ankles. I've rebelled at the university. I've skied at Aspen. I've lived with 2 men, married 1, earned my keep, kept my identity, and frankly, I'm lost." Here's what I discovered in my 35 years on planet Earth, give or take, plus or minus. It's easy to get lost. It's easy to get lost. No matter who you are, no matter what you know, it's just easy to get lost and to find yourself living in that land. Now, the good news is Jesus Christ talked to us a lot about lostness. He has a lot to tell us about living in the land of lost and what he desires to do about that. And one of the ways that he did that was through telling stories. If you know anything about Jesus Christ, you know that he was a master storyteller. And many of the stories that he told are called parables. And today we're going to look at some stories he talks about as it connects with living in the land of the lost. So if you brought a Bible with you, if you have a Bible, turn to the book of Luke. It's the 3rd book in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke. If not, we have a Bible on the big screen, so you can read it along with us if you want to, as we listen to what he has to say in these powerful stories about living in the land of the lost. I love Luke 15. This entire chapter rocks the Casbah, to go back to the 80s. Here we go. Now, verse 1, Luke 15. The tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." The broken people felt drawn to Jesus. The beautiful people did not. The broken people gathered around him. The beautiful people, the elite, grumbled. They felt like he was leaving them out and focusing his attention on these sinners. The religious and political elite of the day didn't like that. They didn't settle well with them. So Jesus proceeded to tell them a story, really 2 stories, about living in the land of the lost. And it reveals several things about lostness and some things about him as well. Check it out in verse 3 following. So he sees this going on, right? He senses. You kind of, even when someone doesn't say it, you can kind of sense a sense of judgmentalism, or someone thinks they're better than you. They're kind of uppity, right? Their nose is so high in the air, they need a 10-foot pole to... Anyway, verse 3, when Jesus told them, sometimes you have to edit yourself when you're preaching. When Jesus told them this parable, he said, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. This is kind of good for Go Texans weekend. I didn't think about that. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends, his neighbors together and says, hey, rejoice with me. Sends out a group text. I love a group text. Rejoice with me. I found my lost sheep. I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents. That means they change their mind, they change the direction of their life, than over 99 righteous, you could put that in quotes, people who do not need to repent. What happens when you have a sheep? You have 100 sheep and one gets away. What does the shepherd do? The shepherd leaves the 99 and goes in high-speed pursuit of the lost sheep. Jesus says, that's what I'm all about. If you're wondering what I'm all about, if you're wondering what my message is about, if you're wondering why I am here in this spot in Israel during this time, it is to seek those who are living in the land of the lost. That's why I am here. I'm going to go after that one. I'm going to go after that one. I'm going to find them, and I'm going to bring that one all the way home. Isn't that great news? That's encouraging to me. That's comforting to me. That when I, like a sheep are not the brightest light in the chandelier, okay? When it comes to animals. That's my understanding. And when I wander away, when I drift away into the land of the lost, that God is going to seek me out. God is going to seek you out to bring you all the way home. It's easy to get lost. It's easy to live in the land of lost. Many things draw us away into lostness. My senior year in college, I'd grown up in the church. I'd studied the Bible. I'd sought to practice the things, the teachings of Jesus. But during my senior year of college, I started to doubt prayer. I'd wonder why my prayers were not working. Then I started wondering about God, wondering about Christianity. And I wandered off for many, many years away from God, away from Christianity, doubting, questioning, deconstructing everything I had heard and believed. And I found myself living in the land of the lost because of doubt. I've had other friends of mine who said, man, I'm just going to try this once. Just once. And they get hooked on whatever drug, and they take another and another, and then they say, oh, I'm just going to get one more, just one more, just one more, just this last time. This is it. And then they drift away, and they're living in the land of the lost, and they were brought there through very simple steps. Drinking's another one. Hey, I can handle it. I can handle my drinking. It's okay. I really don't have a problem. Just this one more. And you find yourself living in the land of the lost. You can get there many ways. But what's amazing, that I discovered in my life, in working with so many people, and also in my own life personally, that when we are lost, God always has some kind of a shepherd that comes in our life to start to bring us home if we are listening and if our eyes are open. he brings us back home. If he loses one, he goes after the lost one. And he keeps going after that one until that one is found. Then Christ says, let me tell you another story. Okay? He goes, look at verse 8 following. Look, he tells another story. He goes, suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends together, yet another group text, neighbors together, and says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. She has 10 coins, she loses one. She goes, oh, that's no big deal. I'm just going to write that off of my taxes in a few weeks. No. Why? She went and she said, hey, I've got to find that coin. I've got to light a lamp. I've got to search under every nook and cranny, and I've got to find that lost coin. Why? Because the coin was of great value to her. So think about this. The greater the value, the harder, the more intense the search. And that's what Christ is trying to communicate to these folks here that are gathered around him. He's talking to two groups of people, those who know they're living in the land of the lost and those who are living in the land of the lost, the Pharisees and religious leaders, but don't know it. He's saying, I value lost things. I value lost people. And so many times we think, well, I don't feel valuable. I don't feel worthy. Well, how do you determine the value of anything? How do you determine the value of anything? How do you determine the value of this beautiful, I don't know what it is, plastic, plexiglass, Wonder Woman-like pulpit? How do you determine the value of it? Thank you. How do you determine the value of this microphone? How do you determine the value of that chair? How do you determine the value of those ostrich boots right there? How do you determine the value of something? It's very simple, I think. You determine the value of something by what someone is willing to pay for it. What someone's willing to pay for it. That determines the value. So when we look at our life, when we look at our value in the eyes of God, you may feel like you're lost or swimming in the sea of doubt like I was or whatever, and you wonder, how am I valued? God values you so much that he came down to earth to seek you out. Christ dies on a cross, rises again in your place to show you how much he values and loves you. And before Christ sacrificed his life on a cross, he went and he valued people. He valued people. He told stories. He met them where they are. He met their needs. He listened to them. He healed them. He helped them to say, every single person is valuable to me and to your Father in heaven. The greater the value, the harder the search. Jesus is saying, if you want to know what I'm all about. So a lot of this story is about Christ sharing his identity with the folks that are there. He said, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. I'm about seeking. I'm about saving the lost. Whether you're lost in a sea of doubt, whether you're lost, right, in a sea of drugs and drinking, whether you're lost in a sense of shame and guilt, I am here to seek out and to bring you back to a place of home, to bring you out of the land of the lost, and to give you a new path, a new purpose. Jesus is saying, that's what I'm all about. I'm a seeker. I'm a rescuer. I'm a truth teller. I'm a life giver. And I've come to seek and to save people who are lost. But a lot of times, we don't like to admit that we're lost, do we? Especially guys. I'm not lost. Honey, I think you're lost. No, I'm not. I know where I am. Now we have Siri. We can yell at Siri. Have you ever yelled at Siri? I have. It's interesting. We don't like to admit we're lost. When I was questioning everything for years, a long time, I didn't like to admit that I was lost. I didn't like to admit that I didn't have evidence for my doubts, if you would, and my skepticism. People that are stuck in the land of the loss of addiction don't like to admit that they're addicted. I can handle it. I'm different. I need this. I'm different. I can handle it. I need this. Or I'm artistic. I'm a musician. Whatever excuse, right? It's not my fault anyway. It's someone else's fault. We don't like to admit it. In order to get out of the land of the lost, we have to admit that we are lost. And you can just say that to God. God, if you know that, say, God, I'm lost. Help me find my way back home. I do not want to live in the land of the lost. Or maybe say, well, hey, I don't know if I am or not. God, show me, right? Show me. Just pray that to God. He sees you. And what else here is so great is this whole context, isn't it? In both of the stories of the lost sheep and the lost coin is the whole deal about community, isn't it? Right? Like, when something good happens to you, what do you like to do? I like to tell someone about it. You don't just hold it to yourself. Man, something good happens to you. Man, something good happens at work. Something good happens at school. Something good happens financially. Man, you want to tell someone, right? You accomplish something in your life, you want to tell someone. That's what happens in this story. And where do you go? You go to community. And that's where we go, the community of the church. And we celebrate and we rejoice. Man, way to go. That's awesome. God celebrates. It's kind of wild, isn't it? But so much of our life is reflective of this other realm, this God realm, this heaven realm. God celebrates, angels celebrate in heaven when someone who was living in the land of the lost makes that turn, confesses, comes to receive and experience the grace of God in their life, and they're going, there's a celebration. Isn't that great? A celebration when someone does that. Just ask God. Say, God, I want to be found by you. And let him find you. Let him find you. John, we'll just call him John because that was his name. He served in the British military many, many years ago, and John was living in the land of the lost, and he knew it. He was rebelling against God. He was wild, he was rough, he was mean, he was cruel. After military, he got involved in human trafficking, actually participated in what we call the Atlantic slave trade. And he was involved in that nefarious, demonic business. And he was out at sea in the ocean, and the big storm hit his ship, and they were rocking back and forth, and the waves were crashing over. And it was at that moment of life and death that John realized, my life is messed up. I am lost. God, if you will get me out of this storm and save me, I will turn away from this crazy life. I will turn away from this dirty, evil business, and I will follow you. And somehow, some way, God answered that prayer. And it radically changed John's life. He quit the business. He started following God. And he spent the rest of his years on earth, there in Britain, across the pond, trying to abolish slavery. He was a man's man, a tough guy. He was no poet. But you would probably recognize this bit of poetry that John wrote down years ago, when he wrote, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see." Pray with me. Lord God Almighty, every one of us has been lost on some level. God, I really believe there's some people here today who need to experience what John Newton experienced many, many years ago, and that's your amazing grace. God, they need your forgiveness. They need to say today, God, I've been living in the land of the lost, but today, and maybe it's not just today, maybe it's been a process that you've been seeking them out, and today they realize, wow, God has found me. God has spoken a word of hope to me. I want to celebrate, and I want to come to God, and I want him to put me on that new path, to bring me all the way home. God, I pray for that man, that woman, that young person who needs to come down front today and say, hey, I need God's grace in my life. I'm tired of trying to run things. I want God to run things in my life. God, I pray that they would stand and come down front today. Lord, I know that there are many others here today that they've already done that. They know your amazing grace firsthand. They've already received that. They're Christians, and they're simply looking for a church family. They're looking for a community, a place where they can go through life and do life together, to go through the tough times and the good times, to celebrate, also to mourn, to serve and to be served. God, they're looking for a church home. And God, you're leading them to second. God, may they stand and come down front as well and come into membership of this, your church family. God, we ask these things. Move and lead and stir in those who need to stand and come down front today. This is our prayer in the name of Jesus.